Hello, everybody. It is about 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in East Tennessee on Monday, August 18th. Wow. So, yeah, we have a lot going on. So, let's start with, right, Trump met with Putin on Friday. All right, then you had all the press stuff, whatever. And then Zelensky came today with the European leaders. Zelensky and them were out, which is why you didn't want them there with Putin, right? Let those two world leaders figure it out. Okay. Now let's start with the press. The press has been amazing on this. All right, it's amazing. Whether if you watched Face the Nation or that witch Radich on ABC, talking with Rubio and everything, and he was kind of funny. So I mean, first of all, they're going to the ceasefire, the ceasefire. There was never going to be a ceasefire. Okay, Rubio's going on trying to explain that this progress, and one of the videos, one of the interviews, even was talking about how, well, the see the other, because she was like, well, we know who started the war when the invasion is. That's the start, not the root causes that the Russians are talking about. Well, I understand in the West that people just think that Putin woke up and just decided to invade with 120,000 troops, a country of 40 million people, as big as Texas. Okay, all right. No, and Rubio admits although he says he doesn't want to go into it, he said yes, there. The encroachment. He used the word encroachment for NATO going in there. That's right. That is one of the key things. Okay. So that was one thing about the press. Asking, well, if he doesn't agree to my demands, then there should be all sorts of punishment. One of the reasons why I think Trump wanted this meeting is because he realized the secondary tariffs, which he announced too soon, as a possibility for punishment. And then he would look weak if he didn't do that. But the Indians already said no. And in effect, a lot of these countries are already starting to trade in their own currencies. So, you know what? And it'll just push India towards the east. So I think he realized, I got to get myself out of this bind so I can just get some sort of a peace deal done. Okay? Then, of course, you have the Ukrainians say this is in this constitution about land, not giving up land, and the Russian Federation, because the referendum in the four oblasts, that's codified in the Russian Federation Constitution. So there are a lot of key items that come into play here, which clearly the press just does not understand. Then I forgot, I think it was in the interview with Rubio, they said, well, according to the British, that it would take another 4 years for them to counter Donetsk. So let me get this straight. They got the amount of land that they've taken in 24, okay, alone is enough to conquer it. And now the average age of the Ukrainian soldier is clearly above. Whatever you hear from the British press, the British MI6, because remember, they are belligerents in there, right? They gave the Storm Shadows intelligence. They've helped them with the sea drone attacks, like on the Kerch Bridge. Okay? They're not a reliable source because the Europeans want this war to keep going because they want the United States in. And at the end of the day, the Ukrainians, okay, particular the nationalists, they would like to see the war continue and find a way to get Europe and the United States directly in the war. Meanwhile, everybody within the territory of Ukraine, for the most part, I've seen the second poll now from Gallup that they want peace. Semaphore and Gallup, okay, have said that. All right, so and it's not a close number; it's pretty high, like 2-1. All right, because their country's being decimated. So I mean, that's what's going on. So I don't know. Now the big thing they're talking about is security guarantees. Security guarantees. First of all, in Istanbul at April of 2022, or just after the SMO, Russia offered certain security guarantees with the West, okay? All right, to Ukraine had they taken that deal, which, if you remember, the deal was in 2022, Lugansk and Donetsk are independent. They weren't even going to be a part of Russia. No NATO, demilitarization and denazification. If you don't know, the denazification part is referring to the ultranationalists who have taken power and a huge central role in the government since the Maidan coup of 2014. Okay? So they have taken a lot of control, and it led to policies of like Ukrainization in the eastern parts of Ukraine, everywhere from Odessa to Kharkiv. Right? You had the 72 people killed in the trade hall in Odessa. This is all before the war. Like right around when Luhansk and Donetsk declared independence in 2014 after the coup. All right, so I just don't see it. The fact that the press even said, will American troops be on the ground? In what planet? The prime reason that Russia has gone into Ukraine is because a military alliance of 30 countries keeps expanding eastward. And the head of that alliance is one of two superpowers in the world that has put building bases in Poland, missiles in Romania, has been meddling in the internal politics of Ukraine, arming them, training them, and now, because after the coup, ultra-nationalists have taken over. Do you really think Russia is going to allow American troops in that? Yeah, we don't want NATO, but we'll just take the head of NATO instead. These people, the Western press is so freaking delusional. They literally live in a fantasy land. They don't even remember the things that they were reporting on. All these reporters and shows used to report about all the problems that were going on in Ukraine, like the ultra-nationalists. Okay? Congressman Ro Khanna tweeted about it. Now they have amnesia. The world just started when the SMO started in February of 2022 to these people. Okay? And if you understand that, you understand how the negotiations are going to work and what's important to the security. Rubio said, Russians have been asking for this for years and during the years. They didn't want to get into it. Why do you want to get into it? Because it's boring? Because it's true? Because it shows you the Western narrative in the media, governments, is not true? Okay? It's false. You do get into it. Then people go, I understand that. Yes, right? Burns wrote the letter. Nyet means Nyet on NATO expansion back in regarding, I think it was Georgia and Ukraine back in 2000 when, soon after Obama got elected. Okay? And then he became the head of the CIA under Biden, just ignoring his own experiences with the Russians. Okay? That's why I've always said they've been very consistent on this position. Okay? And remember, here's another key part. When the Minsk Accords came, which created like a federal system, Luhansk and Donetsk, this is after the Ukrainian army was defeated by the militias of Luhansk and Donetsk, and they were with Russian backing, okay? The Minsk Accords, which were signed by everybody involved, brokered by Germany and France, and was passed unanimously by the Security Council of the United Nations, was never implemented. And it gave Luhansk and Donetsk degrees of autonomy within the government of Ukraine, just like states have rights in the United States, and same with Germany and provinces in Canada, to that same kind of a thing. If Russia really wanted it, then they would have just taken it. The Ukrainian army was defeated, circled. That was it. But instead, we used that time to arm Ukraine, to train Ukraine, to send them weapons. Then you have Trump with the whole, I brought him javelins. Obama sent pillows. Okay, javelins were a very good weapon. Okay, but don't say you're completely not involved. You are. You're head of a government that was arming and training Ukraine against the objections of the Russians. Ukraine has always been in a sphere of their influence. Not only do they want to lose it and have relations because it's on their border in a large country with historical relations, but they definitely don't want it replaced by a military alliance that absolutely hates them. Okay? I said it in my videos before, again and again. Would we want an alliance of Russia, China, whatever, putting a base of missiles and everything in Mexico? No, we would not. No, we would not. We wouldn't tolerate it. Hello, Cuban Missile Crisis. And by the way, a lot of that was a response to us putting missiles in Turkey, going back into the history of it. So, you got to just understand the chain of events leading up to this. So when you see the press and these people, no, they just these childish narratives. And there's a reason why they never do the speeches of Lavrov that you get to see on Indian television and RT or all over the world. That's why they are so respected all over the world, because they show the speeches. It's either, wow, look at the archives. Very consistent. We don't. We get Russia bad, USA good. That's the bullshit we get fed every single day. Meanwhile, we've invaded God knows how many countries, overthrown how many governments, killed how many people, and this is just since the end of the Cold War. Okay, so it's not true. So what you got to do is, you know, is when you understand the truth, and they don't want you, like Rue said, he didn't want the truth to come out. Okay, because it will legitimize the position. Okay, so security guarantee, what does that mean? Who's going to do it? They don't want NATO troops in there. Find the third party troops, and that'll be some sort of a guarantee. I'm sure they wouldn't mind it. You know, I don't know. Serbians, they're not part of NATO, but they want to be part of the European Union. You could probably put in maybe some troops from Latin America, some troops from Asia. Turkey, I think, would be seen as belligerent because they were arming and helping as a member of NATO. So that wouldn't be good. But you could find ways to do it to deal. And if they don't feel threatened by it and it makes the West happy, they'll probably do it. Okay? So that's it. They don't want to go to West Ukraine. Contrary to one belief, 120,000 soldiers at the beginning of the SMO was not going to conquer and control and occupy Eastern Ukraine, let alone Western Ukraine, where they're all ethnic Russians. Matter of fact, they would be dealing with a guerrilla war and a resistance like crazy. Okay, so when you understand these things and you understand what the positions are, so there's no ceasefire. There's not going to be. There will be if there's an agreement in principle, and they work out the details. I could see the Russians doing that. Okay, territory swapping will be hard. I think the ones on the north will be possibly like Sumy and Kharkov. It's just a small amount of territory, and it's not constitutionally in there because it wasn't a referendum. Okay, but all these places are gone. Okay, so you have to understand, the history. And these people don't. If they do, they're just lying and doing what anchor people from corporate media do. Just told what to say and the tone. But you can tell these people just really believe this nonsense. Okay? And they just harp on it. So people believe it. They go, oh, ceasefire's on the table. Trump didn't get it done. Ceasefire is never on the table. Okay? Guaranteed troops. You want to go to war? Do we really want to go to war over the Ukraine in the future? Okay? World War II happened. Let me refresh people's memory. September 1st, Germany invaded Poland. September 3rd, Britain and France declared war on Germany because they gave security guarantees to Poland. They never defended Poland, which is the key. It's the funniest part. But that's the reason why they went to war. It was because of those security guarantees. So we're going to put the security guarantees, American troops at risk, for a country that has backed the Democratic Party, has given more money than any other country to the Clinton Foundation, that Hunter Biden's son sit on the board. Okay? That's this country. Okay? George Soros footprints all over Ukraine. Remember, I've done videos where everything is linked. Okay? And then we get the ceasefire and the territory gobbledygook and the nonsense British military said this and that. You get that. They just come out with propaganda. You don't draft 60-year-olds. I'm sorry, they're not drafting, they're accepting. Because I keep hearing the word conscripting 60. They're not conscripting 60, they're allowing 60. You don't allow 60-year-olds to join your military unless you have a man problem. So you explain to me, with the amount of territory that was taken in 23 and 24 by the Russians after the failed Ukrainian offensive, that it's going to take another 4 years to get the rest of Donetsk when you're allowing 60-year-olds to serve, mostly in service support roles. And they're not going to the front line. They're freeing somebody else who's probably in their 40s. Just a little bit younger to go over. Okay? So, let's see. So Trump just put out a truth about an hour ago saying, yep, we made some progress. We're talking. Okay? You don't want them in the room because all they want to do, all the media, the European leaders in Ukraine, because of their corporatist media, their globalist, neoliberal crowd that they are, they want to keep the war going. That's why it was very important for Trump and Putin to meet separate. Now you can figure it out with them and come up with the principle. But I'm telling you, the non-starters are going to be, we can come up with some guarantee, not involving the head of NATO or something I could see happening, a neutral party somewhere, whatever, There's definitely going to be an unlock that I still think Russia's going to ask for the remaining territory of those four oblasts, which is about 25% in each Zaporozhye, Kherson, and a little about 20% in Donetsk. And I believe Donetsk is falling in the mid-fall anyway. I think they'll get it done before the winter. So that could be it, and it's going to be structure. They don't want to have a big military in there. And you got to remember the influences and why they don't want the United States in there. So let's just move up a little bit. Back in 2016, Victoria Nuland bragged to the U.S. Congress when she was testifying, giving her testimony, about how thoroughly Washington had taken over Ukraine after the 2014 coup. Okay? Remember, the recording of her with Ambassador Pyatt discussing who should be the new ruler of Ukraine. Didn't know that was our job, but we're doing this for democracy, right? After they removed the elected leader, Yanukovych. She spelled it out without shame because she's cheap globalist, okay? By the way, she's the whole Kagan network. U.S. operatives embedded in a dozen Ukrainian ministries. What? The American-trained cops patrolling 18 cities. What? The U.S. Treasury gutting 60 Ukrainian banks while sparing depositors to keep people quiet. Hundreds of millions of dollars funded into molding Ukraine's military. This wasn't assistance. It was a takeover dressed up as aid. Yes, this is what USAID does. This is what they were trying to do in Georgia. They did in Ukraine. A violent coup that took over. This is what Russia doesn't want. Just like we don't want China getting all involved in Mexico or all involved in Canada. And that's it. Okay? And they did all stuff. Remember the CIA basis from the New York Times article? That's it there. We have been there as an active participant to the... and putting people who were actually had ethnic hatred against the minorities that are Russian at the superpower next door. And you're surprised. I'm surprised Putin waited that long, and how patient he is with the West, because he still wants to have good relations in trade and business with the West. But as I've done in other videos, they've shifted everything east. Okay, but this is the nonsense that is just all avoided. This was 2016. Obama was president. Who was in charge of Ukraine policy? Biden. All right. And then Trump says we should be natural allies with the Russians. Russia hoax comes out. Coincidence? All right. So this is interesting. This was the map that was in the White House today. Jack Posobiec posted this out, but I did a screenshot of it and put it in. What I thought was very interesting how accurate it was. Now, if you see my videos of that big push north of Pokrovsk in the Donetsk, so Kherson West, Zaporozhye, Donetsk, and Luhansk is up. All the next Luhansk is taken according to the next. But if you see that little bulge into the white in north of Donetsk, okay, which is the second from the right, that little bulge, they actually have it on the map. That's only happened in the last week and a half. So they actually have that in the map. So this is the official U.S. intelligence map that the White House has. This goes with Deep State and all the other accurate mappers that I've been following. So we know what's going on in the battlefield. We know it's going. And we know it's slow and steady because of the new type of warfare with drones. Like the war, I said, World War I meets high tech. Yeah. Instead of like artillery going off left and right and you can barely move forward or backwards, it's drones. And you have to move in small man armies, okay? Small man units and whatever, and then you have to establish beachhead and you have to get fire control. That takes time unless you want high casualties. And contrary to popular belief, Russia doesn't. Ukraine is very effective with drones also. And so they both are. They've mastered it. Russia's now passed them on from what I understand, the new types of drones they're launching and the technology. But I thought it was very interesting. You see 73, 74%. So this little white here above Kherson, that's the last what they need. Zaporozhye here. See, the difference is the river comes into play in Zaporozhye and Kherson. All right, because if you don't know, the Dnieper River, once it goes through Zaporozhye, hooks right northwest up to Kiev. It does like a horseshoe hook. Okay, so all this Donetsk is east of it. Russians have on Kherson, they've even in the west part passed across the river in a couple spots. So I just wanted to show that map to you. So I did mention the cross. you get the idea of that video. That was all recently in the Pokrovsk region strikes. Now, if you notice the cages on a couple of vehicles, that's anti-drone cages. They build netting on highways. They do all this stuff for drones. The world is drones. But because the West can't send any reporters there because they don't want to mess up the narrative and tell the truth, people don't even get to see what the kind of warfare is. And we're relying on intelligence. Even our own military personnel doesn't really understand this warfare at this point because of the isolation we're creating. And we're relying on Ukrainian intelligence, okay? There are independent. Patrick Lancaster was embedded with the unit in the Pokrovsk area. Go watch it. All right? So here it is in the southwest of Pokrovsk City. Over the weekend, they busted east, the Russians, and made a huge corridor to the east. So they are driving into the city further and further. And they're starting to move north and east here in the southeast. And this is a map I put up last week. So that bulge I was talking about on the map that was in the White House, that's this up in the north. This is the gains going into the weekend, the gray zone. And this red box here in the middle on the bottom, that's the map I just showed you, Pokrovsk. So they're basically close to closing out. And remember, with Donetsk, the 4 years now, the British said, 4 years. Pokrovsk to the northeast, Konstantinivka. And then after that are the two big cities, which are not really big, Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. That was the birthplace of the independence movement of the Donbass after the coup. That's it. There's, for the most part, Donetsk is over, maybe a few villages here and there. It's not going to take 4 years. And they're already cutting off roads from Kramatorsk and Donetsk. And that's why the Azov Brigade was sent in from Kiev at last minute. All right. So, moving on to a little domestic. The S&P price to earnings is about to take out the dot-com record high. So this is scary at this chart. So you're saying I'm at the top. But here's the difference we got to keep a track of, and you have to adjust for this, okay, is the inflation that we had of 30% and the purchasing power of the dollar domestically reflected in this number, okay? Because remember, it's units that have been not increasing, but the price of the unit, that is what's driving revenue. So it's not true growth, in my opinion, most of these companies, okay? So has it gone 30% of that? Are we factoring that in with price to earnings? If it is, then this is a high. If not, there's probably room to grow, especially if earnings increase starting the Trump years. But I think you should keep that in mind. Anytime you see a chart like this, you know what? There's always a pop. There's always a downfall. It just happens eventually. So I just thought I'd share that with you. Last slide is simple. Every state in America needs to abolish property taxes. Governor Ron DeSantis, it's almost like they have to pay rent to the government just to be able to enjoy their property. That's wrong. We need to do something about it. People have their homes paid off and they bought it 30 years ago for a certain amount. Now they're being told it's worth so much more and they have to pony up more and more money. That's ridiculous. You are renting from the government. In no way. Life, liberty, property, John Locke, foundations. Bad enough they tax income. The property, you get it. You should be able to leave that property down, right? If you come up in an area, it happened all over the metro area of New York, for example. People inherit these houses that they want to leave with their kids because they bought it 40, 50 years ago. They're not paying $30,000 on property taxes. They don't. So all you're doing, again, is helping the credentialed class and destroying the working class and the non-credentialed class. Again. All right? And it's ideologically, this is the reason I'm ideologically right. It's your property. You are the sovereign. They should not tax property. You know, go back to tariffs and other forms of, I would like to get rid of the income tax as well and have just certain taxes, certain tariffs, gut the government. There you go. That's the way to go. So, on that note, we're going to keep an eye on what happens. Phone calls, leaks, I'm sure are going to happen through the night. Tweets, updates with this whole Ukraine situation. I'll be keeping an eye on sources that I follow in Russia, India, and so forth to see if what they're saying over there. I'll be tweeting to my ex, which is at Patriot Planner 1, and my getter at Patriot Planner. And I'll follow some other interesting news and economic news in the front. But I wanted to do a little Ukraine heavy day today with everything that's going on. So if you like this video, please follow, like, and share. Thanks a lot, and until the end of the week. Bye-bye.